So you guys came for a fun-filled session of a complex rehab technology update, which you have the best speaker out there, who's Don Clayback. A quick update, or a quick bio on him. Don is the Executive Director of the National Coalition for Assistive and Rehab Technology, which is also known as NCART. It's the National Association of Complex Rehab Technology Providers and Manufacturers focused on ensuring people with disabilities have adequate access to specialized wheelchairs, seating systems, and other adaptive equipment. Don has 28 years of industry experience as a provider, consultant, and advocate, and is actively involved in industry issues. He is a frequent speaker at state and national conferences, knows this information inside and out, is the best I know out there, so I welcome Don. And then at the end, I will give you guys your CU code.
Thank you, Claudia.
I'll have handouts in the back as well.
Thank you, Claudia. Yeah, and we've got handouts. We didn't, we printed copies so everybody has one of those. So if you don't have one, if you want to raise your hand, and Claudia will be passing those out. And if someone, I'll just get this out of the way, if you'd like an electronic copy, if you want to shoot me an email, my email's on there, I'd be happy to send that to you too following today's session. So thanks everyone for joining. Again, my name is Don Clayback, and appreciate the opportunity to speak here at ISS. There's a lot going on, and I wanted to first start out by just getting a sense of people in the audience, just within a couple categories. How many people, if you'd raise your hand, are a clinician or a researcher? Okay, thank you. Provider or manufacturer? Good. Consumers? Okay, great. That gives me a sense. This is more of a rhetorical question, but if I asked how many people here are a CRT advocate, I would hope everybody would raise their hand, and that's kind of part of our presentation, because as I have here in my first slide, we really are under siege, and I don't like to be overly dramatic, but I think when we look at everything that's going on and that has been going on for the past several years, depending on if you're talking about Medicare as a payer or Medicaid programs or managed care programs, specialized equipment is really under attack. And I don't use that term lightly, but in terms of them trying to find ways that they could limit the coverage, trying to decrease payments, or other ways to really limit the coverage of these items is increasing. And that's a big challenge because we're a small community, and I, again, use the term community. If you look on the slide here, I've got what I would say are the members of this community. Thankfully, it's a very passionate group, but we have consumers, family members, and caregivers, clinicians, researchers, providers, manufacturers, advocacy groups, and certainly other people that have an interest. And I'll talk as we move through the presentation that thankfully we've had this group come together, particularly the last couple of years, around our federal legislation. And that coming together is going to be even more important as we move through not only this year, but the next couple of years. Because while we've gained some ground, and I think we're increasing the awareness of what's the importance of complex rehab technology and how it's used, we still have a long way to go, and we need to add more people to the messaging. When we look at complex rehab technology, and that, from a simple definition perspective, is we define that as specialized or individually configured manual wheelchairs, power wheelchairs, the seating and positioning systems that go along with that, along with other specialized equipment like standers and gait trainers and bathing equipment. Now, we could broaden that, certainly include other things like speech-generating devices, and that opportunity exists within the legislation. But for purposes of today's session, when I talk about CRT, I'm really talking about seating and mobility and other types of adaptive equipment. When we look at the future of CRT, and I thought there were some great comments made this morning at the keynotes session, here's what would be at least our punch list of what's important to the future of access. One, we need to increase awareness of what CRT is, and just as importantly, what it isn't. It's in one of the taglines we frequently use, especially in Washington, is that these are not the chairs you see on TV, because unfortunately the TV advertisements and all the things that went along with that have created a lot of the problems that we've been dealing with and continue to deal with. We need to talk about the people that use it and the benefits it provides. And again, if you're a clinician or a consumer, you know, you're in that great position to talk from that perspective, and having those voices added to the providers and the manufacturers and others is really what we need to happen. That has been happening, but we need that to happen even more frequently. Out of that, we need to secure the changes, whether it's on a federal or state level, in terms of coverage, coding, standards, and payment. And I put payment on here specifically. Certainly it's an important factor, but one of the things that in the past we've run into when we try and do advocacy efforts, you know, if it's a coding issue, if it's a coverage issue, we get pretty good support, but sometimes if it's a payment issue, you know, the reaction is, well, that's really a provider issue or a manufacturer issue, and I don't want to get involved with that as a consumer or as a clinician. And frankly, that's the wrong approach because, you know, payment, if you're talking about access, and you can talk about a three-legged or four-legged stool, but certainly 3 legs of that stool would be coding. You need to have the right coding products. You need to have the right, I should say, you need to have the right coverage policies, the right coding of the products, and you need to have the right payment, because if you have those first 2, but there isn't payment available, you know, unless someone has private funds, access is not going to be available to them. We need to develop data on clinical outcomes, increase the consumer and clinical advocacy involvement, and then we need to have support, financial support, for some of the advocacy and research issues that are going on. We have made progress, and I think in spite of our challenges, it's important that we recognize where we have had some wins, because I know many of you have probably get emails on calling your member of Congress or doing this particular activity, and trying to incorporate that into your other daily responsibilities can be a challenge. But it's important that you continue to do that, and for those that haven't had that opportunity, it's important that you get engaged. And the fact is, those have had results. If we look back, going back to 2008, where we had our first exemption from the complex rehab, the Medicare competitive bidding program, we were able to, again, we speaking as a community, were able to get Congress to pass a law that says complex power wheelchairs and accessories are not to be included in competitive bidding because of the individual nature of those. And I think that's been a major win, certainly as a provider or manufacturer. You know, if you go back to 2008, and if we would have envisioned those things going under competitive bidding and the problems that would have caused, you know, thankfully we've enjoyed the benefit of that exemption, you know, over the last 7 years and going forward, although I'll come back to that in a minute. We were able to get the retention of the purchase option for complex rehab power wheelchairs. So if a Medicare beneficiary is buying a complex rehab power chair, obviously, you know, they're going to be using that more than 12 months. So it makes financial sense for Medicare to buy that in the first month versus pay for it over 12 months. And actually, if Medicare rents an item, they actually pay more for it, 5% more than they would if they would have bought it at the front end. So it's basically that question, okay, is it a short-term need or long-term need? And if it's a long-term need, it's better for Medicare, and it certainly is better for the beneficiary if they buy that up front versus dealing with monthly payments. And you know, the idea of renting an individually configured wheelchair presents all sorts of delivery problems. In 2010, again, the competitive bidding within the Medicare program started, and they included complex manual wheelchairs. So the ultralight wheelchair and the tilt and spaced wheelchair were originally included by Medicare. And again, the community got involved, we got Congress involved, and CMS reconsidered their decision, and they pulled those out. So the complex manual wheelchairs and accessories were not part of the competitive bidding program. We've also had some legislation passed on a state level, and I'll talk about that a little later. We do have increased consumer and clinician engagement, which is a big reason for some of the progress we've made. And finally, we definitely have increased congressional awareness. And that doesn't come overnight. It really comes from the past 3 or 4 years going to Congress or people visiting their members in their district. But again, as a result of everybody's efforts, we've got some things we can build on. So I wanted to talk about the federal legislation, and I know some of you may be more familiar than others, but I'll try and cover the key points. Pardon me. The bill that was introduced in Congress is called the Ensuring Access to Quality Complex Rehab Technology Act. And basically what this does, it's a fairly complex bill because of what we have to amend the Social Security Act, and there's a lot of technical language. But here are the 7 things that are encompassed in that bill. First of all, it would create a separate category for complex rehab technology within the Medicare DME-post benefit. So we're not looking to create a new benefit, we're looking to create a new category. And that's important because you don't want members of Congress thinking we're trying to expand coverage to some new products or some new population. We're just saying take these products that are right now within the durable medical equipment category, create a CRT category, and place those products in that. And it would follow what's been done under the orthotics and prosthetics arena, that they also have their separate benefit. And you know, our position is there's a lot of similarities between how custom O&P is provided and how CRT is provided. Once that's done, we designate certain codes as CRT items, and we'd create some new codes for codes that have both CRT items in them and DME, standard DME items. We would eliminate the in-the-home restriction, and many of you are probably familiar with that, but that's been a age-old problem that the policy, at least CMS's interpretation, basically says that they only have to look at the beneficiary's needs in the home, within the 4 walls of their home. So if they have a mobility device that gets them around in the home, that is all they have to consider. They don't have to consider that most people like to get out of their house. They might have to get to the doctor, to get to church, to school, or whatever. Those aren't considered. It would also increase, and it would add some functional considerations on the coverage side. We'd increase the supplier standards, and basically we'd be, part of this is elevating or raising the bar on providers. And many of these things are already being done, but the 2 primary things is we'd look at taking the the ATP credential, which right now is what Medicare uses as one of their standards, and we'd be looking at adding something onto that. What that is would remain to be seen. There'd be a committee to create that. But as was talked about this morning, the ATP by itself was a good start, but it certainly isn't, focused on strictly seating and mobility. And many folks feel that, there's something extra that needs to be added to that. So, and there'd be a committee that would develop that. There'd be a time, 2-year time period. So that would not be something that would be an immediate change. And the other change is around repairs. From a consumer perspective, that's a big problem. From a company that does repairs, that's competing against a company that does not do repairs because of the challenges, that's an unfair playing field. So we're looking at basically saying if you're going to provide this equipment, you have to repair it, or have the capability to repair it. Certainly you have to be paid for it, but repairs, as certainly the providers and manufacturers know, is a loss center for providers. It's extremely difficult to get paid. You have to have parts inventories. You've got to have response times. And so the good companies that are dedicated to their customers have invested in a repair department. There's some companies that haven't, and we want to level that playing field. It would require, the 5th thing would require a clinical evaluation for all CRT mobility bases, so both manual and power wheelchairs. And then these last 2 are somewhat limited. It would allow for people that are in a nursing home that, and this would be a small population, people that are in a nursing home that want to transition out to the community and have other plans in place, but one of the barriers is they can't get the technology because the nursing home isn't going to pay for it, and because the person's in a nursing home, Part B isn't going to cover it, that there would be a policy change that if someone met certain criteria, they would be able to access CRT within that nursing home. And the last thing is, we talked about that exemption for complex rehab technology from competitive bidding. It's really, it's not as expansive as it needs to be, so this would kind of close that gap and tighten that up from an overall CRT perspective and give that overall protection from any future competitive bidding programs. Okay, quickly on the history side, and again, I know some of you are aware of this, but I don't think everybody is. This started really about 4 years ago. It's been led by a stakeholder group that includes organizations that represent providers and manufacturers, that represent clinicians, and that represent consumers. And those organizations are on the list here. There's been a lot of other people that have been involved in it, but it really has been a broad-based initiative from the start to try and figure out how do we address comprehensively some of the challenges that impact CRT access. The original initial bill was introduced on the House side, and this would have been 2 years ago in 2013 by Congressman Joe Crowley out of New York and Jim Sensenbrenner out of Wisconsin. And then we also had a Senate bill introduced in May by Senator Schumer out of New York and Senator Cochran out of Mississippi. We've been working on this, as many of you are aware, and we've made good progress. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but people say, geez, I mean, is this ever going to get done? I mean, we've been talking about this for years. And when they, when you hear that phrase, it's going to take an act of Congress, there's a reason that that phrase was created. There's a lot to that, and particularly over the last few years. I mean, if we take our CRT advocate hat on and put our taxpayer hat on, or our citizen hat, unfortunately Congress is a very busy place. They've got a lot of things they should be dealing with, and it's unfortunately a very unproductive place. There's a lot of partisanship where even things like our bill that thankfully we've been under the banner of bipartisanship so that it's not really a Republican or Democrat bill. We've got very good broad-based support. But in spite of that, people getting legislation, congressmen getting legislation passed is a real challenge. So those are things that everybody's facing. And then from our bill's perspective, Jim Sensenbrenner, who is one of our leads, spoke to a group last year, actually at our CRT conference in Washington, and he, was talking, there was about 20 of us there, and he was talking about some of the challenges, and he said, what you folks have, he said, it's a challenge to get anything passed in Congress, but you folks really have two challenges. First of all, you have to educate people on what CRT is, and as we all know, that takes a little time. And then you can start telling them about what you're dealing with and why you need it fixed. So those are things that, it's taken a little longer than what we might have liked. And then finally, our bill is fairly complex. I mean, the 7 things that I talked about are important, but to get them to be put in place requires some technical language, and it's not a simple 2-page bill that somebody can read and understand quickly. So those aren't excuses. We've certainly overcome and addressed those barriers, but I think they're things we need to be mindful of. Last year, from a progress standpoint, we finished with 190 members of Congress signed on, 168 in the House side and 22 in the Senate. And the good news is we not only had good quantity, but we also had good quality. There's key committees. We had good balance. We had 65 Republicans and 100 Democrats on the House side, 16 Democrats and 6 Republicans on the Senate. But most importantly, we had good membership of the key committees. On the House side, you have 2 committees that have jurisdiction over Medicare. That would be the Ways and Means Committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee. And we've gotten 22 members on Ways and Means, 17 on Energy and Commerce. And on the Senate, you've got the Finance Committee and the Help Committee, and again, 5 and 4 on those committees. So we want to improve on those numbers, but really for that 2-year period, and with some of the challenges we've had to face, I think that we can take some pride in getting to that progress, but we're not over the goal line, so we don't want to be content with that. The list of those members, and again, this was last year's signers, is available on, I'll mention this website in a couple different times. We've got our NCART website that I'll talk about, but we also created this access2crt.org website, and that has a lot of information, including a list of who signed on to the bill. So you can go, click on that, look at your state, and see if your members are on. As we look at this year, what our pathway to get passage, we think, again, good momentum from last year. What happens is Congress is in session for 2 years at a time, and when a session ends, which this last session ended in December, if the bill hasn't been passed, it basically dies, which is not unusual for those things to happen. And then when the session resumes, bills get reintroduced. So it's a fairly automatic process, and our bill will be reintroduced. It's working its way through Legislative Council, and we hope to have it reintroduced probably sometime next week or the following week. So it basically is going to be the same bill, same title. It'll have a couple minor changes relative to definitions, but nothing substantive. And we'll have new bill numbers, that we'll be working on. And as soon as it's dropped, believe me, you'll be getting notice of that through our various organizations. What we have to do is get the bill dropped. Then we need to work on bringing last year's co-sponsors on, which is pretty automatic, but we will be asking you to reach out to your members, say, hey, we appreciate your support last year. Can you sign on again this year? And there will be instructions on what they need to do to make that happen. But we also want to continue to talk to some people that haven't signed on the bill. We did lose about 20 members because of elections, so there's 20 offices we want to pick up. And plus there's some other ones that your phone call may be the call that puts them over the edge because they've been hearing about this for the last year or two. We also have some conferences coming up in D.C. that'll be focused. One of the focuses will be this legislation. We have the Paralyzed Veterans Conference in March. We've got the National MS Society in March. We have our own NCART and NARTS conference in April. And then we have the ALS Association in May and the United Spinal Association in June. So for all these conferences, there will probably be a minimum of 200 to 300 people, and one of their, if not their only talking point, is going to be our legislation. So it's good. We're going to get a good head start as we move through this year. I mentioned this dedicated website. Again, that has a lot of information, so if you're looking for background information, if you're looking for the actual legislation, we've got what we call a legislation information pack, and that's a great document to share with your member. It'll be updated, but it has a letter from the 2 House sponsors, a letter from the 2 Senate sponsors. It's got the position paper, and it has a pictorial kind of highlighting the differences between CRT mobility and standard mobility. And it also has a list of the 50-plus organizations that have signed on in support of this. We're kind of unveiling at this conference what we're calling the CRT 3 Club. And I wanted to kind of put on some criteria. I was going to say, well, you have to be above average intelligence, everybody notices when you walk in the room, blah, 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 but I decided to save the attempt at humor and just get to the guts of it. What we really need everybody to do in this room, and all your friends and relatives and others, is to reach out to your 3 members of Congress. You've got your member in the House of Representatives, and then you've got your 2 senators. They need to hear about CRT, and they need to hear from you as somebody in their district, somebody that is a provider of this equipment, a prescriber of this equipment, or a user of this equipment. That really is what we need to make happen. How we've gotten to where we are today is because that has happened. Why we haven't gotten this thing passed yet is because it hasn't happened enough. And that's what 2015 is about. We need to get more of those voices. We've got that website set up. It's very easy. You can email your member of Congress. You go there, plug in your address and your zip code. It'll pop up with a templated email. Again, hold off until the new bill gets populated because we need to update that email. But that'll be available to you. It'll also give you, if you're not sure who your member is in the House side, it'll give you their contact information. So send them an email, follow up with a phone call. While they get a lot of calls and emails, they do pay attention to those. So don't think you're going to be kind of a voice in the wilderness. If they're hearing from 4, 5, 6 people over the course of a week or 2 about a bill, it's going to be talked about within that office, and that's what we need. The advantage you've got is, in all likelihood, you're not going to be the first person that's reached out to that office. And as I said, you may be the call that finally pushes that over the edge. And again, our progress is really proof that polite persistence pays off, and you need to be polite, but more emphasis is you need to be persistent. And there's a kind of a correlation. I should have a little graph, like the more you call, the less polite you have to be. So you can kind of get a little more direct and a little more aggressive. It's like, hey, I met with you last year, I've sent you all the information, I've answered your questions. Tell me why you're not signing on to this. And there may be reasons. There's going to be a cost to this bill, so we don't need to get everybody on, but we need to focus on, certainly the key committee members. and you need to be persistent and not, take no for an answer. Just like the old, sales process, you need to keep knocking on that door and address whatever objections they have. Feel free to contact me directly, and I can either answer your question or hook you up with someone who can. But we've got a lot of resources we've gathered that should put you in a good position to make that sale to your member of Congress. Okay, the next topic, and really one that's got a little more urgency, and some of you may be aware of it, and you've got a handout on this. I'm going to talk about it on the slide, but this yellow handout that we're passing out today, and we'll have copies at the back of the room if you don't have one yet, and we've got some of those on the exhibit floor, is a new issue that came out from CMS where basically I talked about the exemption from competitive bidding, and as most folks know currently, if you're providing a complex manual wheelchair or a complex power wheelchair, when you provide that and are using accessories that might have been included in competitive bidding and that have a competitive bidding price, if you use the right modifier, when you bill for those, you will get paid at the traditional fee schedule, which is the way the things have been operating since 2008. Unfortunately, in December of last year, CMS put out an announcement that basically is saying they plan on changing that. And what they're planning on doing is effective January of next year is all accessories are going to have one price, and that price will be the competitive bidding price. That is going to be a real, I say challenge, I want to say something more dramatic than that, to access, because unfortunately when you look at some of these items, when you have the normal Medicare fee schedule and you have the competitive bidding fee schedule, you could have a 25, 35, 40% difference in those pricing. And again, things that were bid under competitive bidding, for better or worse, they were standard items, and those were the prices that were established. Complex rehab accessories were not bid under competitive bidding. And plus, as we talked about earlier, they were exempted from Congress. So our position is that this rule change by CMS goes against both the technicality of the legislation and also Congress's intent, and it also goes against the policies that CMS created on their own, which basically said, all right, Congress, you're saying to us that complex rehab shouldn't be hit by competitive bidding because it's individually configured. We got it, and we're going to create the policies to follow that. And things have been working, fairly well. They had some problems with their software system, but in terms of the policy, that's the way things have been working and will continue to work that way until the end of this year. But unless we change this, all of a sudden, January 1st, these items are going to get hit 25, 30, 40% discounts, and we're talking about major items. As everybody knows, when you're looking at a complex wheelchair, there are literally two major components to that, if I use the term component. You have the base of the wheelchair, and then you have the seating and accessories. And that's one unit. They're not separate. So you can't say, well, we're going to protect the base of the chair, but we're going to competitively bid all the accessories and seating and just let the marketplace work that out, because it really goes against the whole concept of getting the person really what they need from the evaluation and trial process. So the game plan going forward is, and we're looking at about 170 wheelchair codes. So what are the things that are going to get hit by this? Seat cushions, tilt systems, recline systems, specialty controls, hardware interfaces. I mean, all the things that are critical, not just from a power wheelchair standpoint, but also have impact on manual wheelchairs. So our approach really is twofold here. We've got an industry work group, and we're preparing some information that we'll be sharing more widely. But basically, our first step is to work with Congress. And I should also say, before CMS issued this rule, they went through a public comment period. So they put out this policy, and they really didn't describe how they were going to treat complex rehab items. It was very kind of high level. But it talked about, expanding competitive bidding pricing and that they had to do this per Congress. And NCART and others submitted comments about, okay, well, here's some things you need to keep in mind about what you're trying to do. But most importantly, remember, complex rehab accessories and bases have to be kept separate from this initiative, and you need to preserve the current policies in place. So we put that in writing on 2 occasions. We met with them in person during the comment period. And while the comment periods are going on, they don't really respond to you. They're kind of just in a listening mode. But that's when the final rule came out, and the final rule was still fairly silent. But again, when you don't have an answer and you've asked for it, you start getting suspicious. So we did submit a written request for clarification, and that's when that FAQ came out in December, and where we had an indication where they cite complex rehab items and accessories and talk about having one price and using competitive bidding for that. So what we're doing is we're working with Congress. We've gone to our friends in Congress who at least have some familiar with CRT and say, hey, here's what they're doing. And their first reaction is, well, wait a minute, I thought we exempted that stuff. And we say, exactly, that's why we're here. So we're asking Congress to write a letter to CMS basically saying, we passed this law, we've done some other things to tell you this shouldn't be included, you've gone and created the right policies for it, and now all of a sudden you're going against those policies and you're changing it, and that's wrong. And we want you to rescind this announcement around complex rehab, and we want you to maintain the current policies. We've gotten 4 senior members of Congress on the House side that are working on that letter as we speak. Again, as soon as that comes out, the way the mechanics will work is it'll be a letter we're looking for as many members of Congress to sign on to. So once these 4 members finalize the letter, which we hope will be sometime next week, and will be part of the final review, what they do is they will send a cover letter to all the members of the House. So 435 members of Congress will get a cover letter saying, hey, we got this issue with CMS, they need to change it, we're sending this letter, we'd like you to sign on. And they say, if you'd like to sign on, you know, call Sue at my office or Joe at my office. That goes out from the members of Congress. But as soon as that goes out, we're going to need everybody to call your member of Congress and give them that same request, that, hey, here's what CMS is doing. They're not going to change unless they hear from Congress. We've got a letter going on that's got bipartisan support. We need you to sign on to that letter. And we're probably only going to have about a week to get those signatures. And again, we will publicize this very widely, so I'm sure you'll be hearing about it. And if you sign up, and I'll mention at the end where you can sign up for updates, we'll make sure that, you know, if you're on that email list, you'll make sure you'll get it at least from that source. And, well, in fact, I've got it on here. So sign up there for updates. So as of today, I don't have any specific marching orders or requests except for to make you aware of that issue. It will have dramatic impact on access. And the big thing to remember is this will not just impact Medicare. This will flow through to Medicaid programs, to managed care programs, to other private payers, because they will jump on the opportunity to find something that they can use to reduce pricing. So good news is we had a win in 2008, we had a win in 2010, and unfortunately in 2016 CMS is trying to take that away. And the only way it's going to change is we get Congress involved, and we started in that process. So appreciate you staying attuned to that, because it's going to take that member getting a dozen phone calls from his district to recognize that this is an important issue. Okay, let me transition to the state legislation. We've been doing work on the state level because of some of the Medicaid challenges. When we talk about state recognition, we're not talking about a separate benefit category anymore, because that's about the Social Security Act and about Medicare. We're really talking about separate recognition. And around that, we've been successful in 3 states, Washington, Colorado, and Connecticut. We've got legislation that either is or it has or is being introduced in, has been introduced in New York and Oklahoma, and it is being proposed for introduction in Florida, Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin. The thing about here, and we've got CRT work groups in those states, so if you have questions, you can let me know, but if you want to pursue that in your state, you know, give us a call. We can give you some guidance. The big thing is you want to start with a plan. We've got some templates you can use, but you really need to do some strategy strategic thinking and discussions before you jump into this. And there's a variety of information available at the NCAR website. Okay, and here's basically what's embodied in the legislation as I mentioned earlier. We talk about coding, we talk about giving these CRT items some separate recognition to recognize the specialized nature of the equipment and how it's provided. We talk about supplier standards because it's amazing that many of the Medicaid programs don't even have the Medicare standards as part of their requirements for their suppliers. So we're saying you need to do that as a minimum. And then on the payment side, we're saying you need to talk about the concept that the payment system needs to recognize the service that's involved, because we run into frequently Medicaid programs that want to look at the cost of the product, and really that's half of the picture. The service that's involved, from the evaluation to the eventual delivery, the ongoing support, the billing and documentation, and the repair department, all those things have to somehow be incorporated into the price of it, and those are the discussions we have with the Medicaid programs as part of this. We've got a bunch of educational information at the NCAR website. If you haven't visited that, I'd encourage you to check that out. We've got several tabs, but the education area has a lot of things that are available for download. As I say here, we've got an introduction to CRT video, which is from a consumer and physician perspective. They talk about CRT, and I think it's a very effective program, video, and from an educational perspective for the policymaker, whether that be on the federal or state level. And then we've got other things, outlining what the delivery process is, pictorials on how CRT mobility is different. So they're all things that you can probably deliver the message based on your own experience. These are things that will give you those educational tools to supplement that. And I think lastly, I wanted to talk about we've got our National CRT Conference that is a partnership with NCART and NARTS. We put on for a number of years. It's a great opportunity to take our CRT message to Congress. This year it's going to be April 21st to April 23rd. The first day is kind of a leadership day that's kind of business practice related. The second day is an advocacy day where we talk about advocacy issues, and we have speakers talking about how to become better advocates on a federal and state level. And then the third day are the visits to Congress. And that's all scheduled on your behalf. You just need to go and register, and you can register and get additional information at either the NARTS website or the NCART website. And lastly, some of you may have seen this before, but Margaret Mead had this quote: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world." And I know many people here feel like they are committed, and depending on how you want to define that. It should be committed. Thanks, Jerry. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever was, and I think, or that ever has. And I think we're really proving that as we take this journey in Congress. We're a small group. We're making progress. We've got more work to do, so appreciate you being here and appreciate you spreading the word to your colleagues and peers so we can get more people engaged. So with that, we got a few minutes for questions, I think, right? Okay. Okay, good. Oh, we got plenty of time for questions. Good. All right. So any questions or things that we haven't covered or talked about? Claudia's going to, if you raise your hand, she'll come around and give you the microphone.
Yeah, Don, the reduction in some of those codes for seating and positioning items like headrests and cushions, that's in effect now. As of now, is it not? It's not going to be coming because, according to the website, it's happening already.
Well, the application of this policy is not impacted now. It doesn't go into effect until January 1st, 2016. So, are you seeing that, or you've seen?
Well, one of the spreadsheets that CMS puts out that I go to get reimbursement levels based on code already shows all of those items as capped rentals with competitive bidding reimbursement rates for this year, for 2015. So maybe I'm misreading that.
Did you say the capped rental? Is that what you?
Yeah, like for example, tilt systems, they're CR, capped rental, and then they have the competitive bidding rate in there for everybody. We're in Wausau, Wisconsin. We're not in a competitive bidding area, but
well, there's two issues maybe to point out. One is you should be getting paid the traditional payment amount on those. And two, the cap rental, which was a different issue where they've treated those as cap rental. If you're providing them on a complex rehab base, you should be getting paid for those as a purchase, not as a rental. So 2 points. One is you want to make sure you're getting paid as a purchase, and the other thing is you should be getting paid at the traditional rate, not the competitive bidding rate, if you're providing them on a Group 3 chair. So,
Can I
and
add
follow
in
up with me if, and Claudia, anything you
I
want
was
to
going
clarify?
to say, what might be missing, those require a KY modifier, or you're going to get paid at the competitive bid rate, and a lot of people miss that.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many people miss that.
Yeah, there's specific modifiers,
make
and,
sure-
and again, if you need more information, shoot me an email and we'll send you a copy of that policy. But frankly, and you raise a good point, I'm glad you asked that question, because that's a lot of dollars on the table. So if you haven't been using the modifier, that'd be something, one, you want to do it going forward, and maybe there's an opportunity. Claudia, they could go back and recoup that with the right modifier. So you paid for your trip, I think, by just attending here. So, okay. Yeah, there we go. Let's just stop right there. Okay, no. Yes.
Yes, sir. Is there any study or anyone looking into the diagnosis-driven codes and the loopholes in those, such as, a custom back for someone with scoliosis or myotonic dystrophy for a Group 3 power base?
Yeah. What I think the short answer, no currently, but part of this legislation is when we talk about changes in the coverage policy, we're trying to get away from the pure diagnosis-driven policy and consider other considerations. So that's, it's embedded in the legislation with kind of that wording that CMS or HHS will, as they look at these other coverage changes, they'll also look at functional and other considerations, not just a strict diagnosis. So there's nothing going on currently that I'm aware of, but that is something that's been recognized as a problem, and with this legislation, that should open the door for that.
This is a problem
Yeah.
that you're saying is not being addressed.
Not currently.
Okay.
And I'll just be candid. Some of the issues we've got, and I'll get back to our small community, is we've got to kind of prioritize the things that we can take on. And I'm happy to talk about that separately, and if that's a bigger issue. And it certainly is an issue. But one of the things that we work on from NCART's perspective and others, is how do we, what do we tackle and how do we do it in the most effective way? And unfortunately, there are problems even within the legislation. There were some things when we were drafting this, there were a lot of ideas on other things that we wanted to address. And it's one of those things that you need to make that strategic decision on. If we try and cover too much at once, we're never going to get anywhere. And so you try and find that balancing line where, all right, let's address, hopefully 80% of the issues, and then once we've accomplished that, we can then focus on the other 20%. So. Yeah. That's the other thing. I mean, the cap rental thing was a joke. I mean, just in terms of, yeah. Right. Yep. Hey, and great point. Yep, exactly. And for those in the back, you made the point about the problem with cap rental and with the Tilton space being converted to cap rental. Great point and great reminder to me. I mentioned we've got some, quote, minor changes in the bill. There is a sentence in the new bill that will say all CRT items will be available with a purchase option. So if we get this passed, that will correct the Tilton space problem. So. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, that's an understatement. Yes, Claude, or yes.
For those legislators that are interested in minimizing and/or the budget deficits, they're interested in a CBO score.
Hmm?
And
Right.
the lack thereof has been a little bit of a difficulty with dealing with some of them. Do we
So
have a CBO
I'm having
score?
trouble hearing you. So the CBO?
The CBO score, do we have one yet?
No. And here's the deal, and again, thanks for bringing that up. One of the things, and it was on my slide earlier, one of the things we need to have is the CBO score from the Congressional Budget Office. And here's the problem with this, getting the score from the CBO. Because they're so overwhelmed, they basically don't score something until it's almost ready to be voted on. And so I know some people get the objection. In fact, we put together a specific handout you can use with your member if they tell you, well, it doesn't have a CBO score and I can't sign on. It's really a cop-out. I mean, it is because, you know, it's a catch-22 because, you know, we can't get a CBO score until the thing has got a lot more support, and you won't sign on until we get the CBO score. So, you know, I'll paraphrase what I put in this document is, and again, let me take a step back on the cost side. When we started this, we had a Washington, D.C. policy firm do a CBO type score, even before the bill got introduced. And so what they do is a lot of these guys work for the CBO, and so, I mean, we have to pay them, but they're still independent. They do things under their own name, and we had to pay them about $40,000, so it wasn't cheap. I don't know, maybe 50 we would have got a better answer, but we got but we had that score done, and they came back and said the cost of this legislation would be $56 million over 10 years. And we don't want to be cavalier about the money, but you know, $56 million over 10 years, let's say $6 million a year, isn't a lot of money for what you're would accomplish through this bill. And you also, it doesn't factor in the benefits of maybe, you know, however many people are going to get a better wheelchair, are going to have better outcomes. So that's the first point you want to make is we did an independent study by a DC firm that's well recognized. They said it's going to be about $60 million. There is a request. Our sponsors have requested the CBO to score our bill, but we're in a line with probably about literally 2,000 other bills. And until we get to the front of that line because of our sponsorship, we're at a catch-22. And so what I tell people is, you know, push your member, explain to them, and I think your best option is to say, hey, we've done the best we can. We've spent $40,000 to get an estimate. I'd like you to sign on to the bill based on that. If it comes back a lot higher, you can withdraw your support. We know you're not going to vote on the bill, whatever you want to do. So it isn't like by a person sponsoring the bill, they're committed to it. You know, and my position is, this is the information we're putting in front of you, and I'm asking you to sign on based on that. And that's been successful with some members. You're going to have some that aren't going to accept that, and you don't want to burn any bridges, but I would kind of push them like, hey, what else can we do? You're kind of, you know, the system has got our hands tied, but at least you can share that, shows we've tried to make some attempts, and at least we've got a range of what this might cost. So, does that help? Sure.
Going back to the diagnostic codes, is there any update on the diagnostic codes being correct for the billing part versus what the doctors are writing for diagnosis? They seem to be or not all of them are current. Are the diagnostic codes that we bill under? For example, there is no tetraplegia in a billing code.
Well, here I'm actually going to throw that. I know some of you know Claudia, but we have a moderator who also is a reimbursement expert and with the Orion Group, and so I'm frankly not that familiar with that. So Claudia, I don't know if you have anything you could add.
Yeah, more than likely it's going to get solved with ICD-10 when that comes out, which is supposed to, and I'd actually think that's going to happen. I think it actually will happen this year. But your more detailed diagnoses are going to be ICD-10. But I don't honestly see a ton of issues with claims with your little bit of differences.
He was just saying he has to get the doctors to maybe redo the jargon with some of the diagnoses. Just make sure you watch what the doctors, I always ask their office staff for a list of diagnoses codes, because sometimes within their almost face sheets, they have a lot more stuff that they didn't give you on a 7-element order on a quick script pad.
You may have a lot more there. Sometimes if they're with a big facility with therapists, I'll also look at theirs. So you might alleviate some headaches, but it'll be ICD-10, which will have its own nightmares when our claims go through.
Thanks, Claudia. Any other questions?
No? I got to get a number then. I've got your CU number here in 5 seconds.
And a couple things while you're wrapping up. I'll just, again, feel free to email me if you got any questions or input or suggestions. You know, we've got a lot of people working on this, but really its success is going to come from you know, helping us spread the word to your customers and to your fellow peers. NCART looks at our job as, you know, creating the tools that make that hopefully as easy as it can be for you. And we can certainly carry the message and develop the position papers, but we need you to engage with your members, and that may be on a state level if we're working at within state legislation, or obviously on some of these Medicare issues. But stay tuned, and again, if you sign up for at that Access to CRT, you'll be sure you're going to get the latest updates, and some of it may not be of interest to you, but at least you know you won't miss anything. So thanks again for your attention.
And one quick note I'd also say for any of you guys who can somehow make it to DC in April, the CRT conference, which I've now gone to for I don't know how many years at this point in time, the more people we get up on the Hill, quite honestly, the better. And providers, great. Clinicians, in my opinion, even better because you're the clinicians. So anybody who could get out there, Don did not ask me to say this, but I would ask for everybody to get there as much as possible.